house that was never built. If you like the story, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. Also, it would be fun if you let me know what time it is when you watch it. Alex had always been fascinated by the strange and unexplained. Their evenings were often spent scrolling through online forums, diving into obscure websites, and reading urban legends late into the night. It was on one of these restless nights that Alex stumbled upon a forum buried deep in the folds of the dark web, a place where anonymity reigned, and the stories were far darker than anything they'd encountered before. The forum was simple, almost primitive in design, with no images or flashy banners, just lines of text against a black background. Most of the threads were typical of internet lore, ghost sightings, cursed objects, and tales of cryptic websites that shouldn't exist. But one thread caught Alex's attention immediately. The title was cryptic and chilling. The House. That was never built. Curiosity piqued. Alex clicked the thread. The original post was written by someone using the alias Silent Architect. It described a phenomenon that sounded absurd at first. A house that didn't physically exist, but could be visited in dreams. According to the post, the house wasn't like any normal structure. It was unfinished, incomplete, with hallways that stretched forever and rooms that defied logic. The house didn't adhere to the rules of reality. Walls would shift, staircases would lead to nowhere, and doors would open to black voids. What struck Alex the most was the tone of the post. It wasn't written like a spooky campfire tale. It read like a warning. The author claimed that once someone became aware of the house, it would begin to appear in their dreams, pulling them in deeper each time. "The house knows you," Silent Architect Yao had written. The more you think about it, the closer it gets. The comments were equally unsettling. Dozens of users shared similar experiences, each one more chilling than the last. One user described wandering through endless hallways in their sleep, hearing whispers coming from behind the walls. Another claimed to have seen a shadowy figure standing in the distance watching them, but always just out of reach. Some comments were more cryptic, warning readers to avoid the house at all costs, but others, clearly curious like Alex, asked how they could find it. Toward the end of the thread, Silent Architect had left a set of instructions. Alex's heart raced as they read them. It wasn't a ritual or spell, just a series of steps to open the door to the house in their dreams. The steps were simple. Clear your mind before sleep. Imagine an unfinished house and focus on walking through its door. If the house wants you, the post concluded, you'll know. Alex leaned back in their chair, staring at the screen. It was ridiculous, obviously. A house in your dreams. The idea was absurd, but the comments, the warnings, and the eerie detail in Silent Architect's description made it hard to dismiss. Against their better judgment, Alex saved the page and decided to try it that night. When bedtime came, Alex followed the instructions. They lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to clear their mind. They pictured a house not fully formed with incomplete walls and exposed beams. They imagined walking toward it, the door looming large in their mind's eye. It felt silly, but something about it was oddly compelling. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, Alex found themselves standing in a place that was both familiar and alien. The air was thick, heavy, and the landscape around them was an endless, featureless void. And in the distance there it was, the house. It stood alone, its silhouette jagged and unnatural, as though it had been hastily constructed by someone who didn't understand how buildings worked. The closer Alex got, the more unsettling the house became. Its walls were made of different materials, wood, brick, concrete, all clashing and mismatched. Some rooms had ceilings that stretched impossibly high, while others were claustrophobically low. The windows were uneven, and the door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as though inviting Alex inside. They hesitated, their heart pounding. This was just a dream, right? It had to be. But everything felt too real. The chill in the air, the faint smell of damp wood, the sound of the creaking door. Against their better judgment, Alex stepped inside. The interior was worse. The walls shifted as they moved, the floorboards creaking under their weight. Hallways branched off in every direction, some narrowing to impossibly thin slivers. others expanding into vast empty spaces. There was no logic to the layout, no sense of design or purpose. It felt alive, as though the house was watching Alex, shifting to match their thoughts. Then came the sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed through the house, coming from somewhere, deep within. Alex froze, their breath catching in their throat. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, until it seemed to be right behind them. Spinning around, Alex came face to face with a shadowy figure standing in the hallway. It wasn't fully formed, its edges blurry and indistinct, like smoke trying to take shape. The figure didn't move, but Alex felt its presence, an overwhelming sense of dread that made their skin crawl. "Don't come back," the figure said, its voice low and guttural. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. Before Alex could respond, the floor beneath them gave way and they plunged into darkness. They woke up in their bed, drenched in sweat, their heart racing. It had felt so real, more vivid than any dream they'd ever had. They rubbed their wrist absent-mindedly, only to freeze when they saw it. A faint circular mark, like a burn, etched into their skin. The house had marked them. Alex sat upright in their bed, staring at the faint mark on their wrist. It was barely noticeable, like the shadow of an old scar, but its presence filled them with unease. They tried to convince themselves it was nothing, a rash perhaps, or a mark left from leaning on something while they slept. But deep down they knew it wasn't that simple. The dream, the house, the shadowy figure, it had all felt far too real. The day passed in a fog. Alex couldn't shake the vivid imagery of the house, the mismatched walls, the endless hallways, the figure's chilling warning. They avoided looking at their wrist, afraid the mark would somehow grow if they acknowledged it. Even when they tried to distract themselves with work or errands, their thoughts inevitably drifted back to the house. It was as though it had burrowed into their mind, refusing to let go. That night, Alex lay in bed staring at the ceiling. They told themselves they wouldn't think about the house. They wouldn't follow the instructions again. But as sleep crept closer, their thoughts betrayed them. The image of the house, its looming door and shifting walls, appeared unbidden in their mind. And before they realized it, they were asleep. The transition into the dream was seamless. One moment, Alex was lying in bed. The next, they were standing before the house again. This time it looked slightly different. The jagged silhouette was more defined, its edges sharper, as though it had grown more complete. The mismatched walls seemed taller, the windows darker. The air around it was heavier, thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. The door creaked open as Alex approached, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. They hesitated, remembering the figure's warning, "Don't come back." But something about the house was magnetic, pulling them forward despite their fear. Their feet moved on their own, carrying them across the threshold. Inside, the house had changed. The hallways were more structured now, though still disjointed and wrong. The walls seemed to ripple slightly, as if alive, and the air was filled with a faint hum that Alex couldn't quite place. They wandered cautiously, their footsteps echoing against the warped floorboards. Each step felt heavier, as though the house was drawing them deeper into its grasp. Then came the tapping. It started softly, barely audible, but grew louder with each passing second. Alex froze, their heart pounding. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the walls in an impossible way. They turned in, circles trying to pinpoint its source, but the house offered no answers. "Who's there?" Alex called out, their voice trembling. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed against Alex's ears, suffocating and absolute. Then from the far end of the hallway, a shadow began to take shape. At first it was small, almost insignificant, but it grew as it moved closer, its edges blurring and shifting like smoke caught in a breeze. It was the same figure from before, but this time it felt more real, more solid. "Why are you here?" the figure asked, its voice low and resonant. It didn't move closer, but its presence filled the hallway, pushing Alex back a step. I didn't mean to come back," Alex stammered, their voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know what this place is." The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion that made Alex's skin crawl. "You've crossed the threshold," it said. "You shouldn't have come back." "What is this place?" Alex demanded, trying to sound braver than they felt. "Why am I here?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, its shadowy fingers pointing to Alex's wrist. The mark burned, a sharp, searing pain that made Alex wince. "You've been marked," it said. "The house knows you now." Alex instinctively clutched their wrist, stepping back. "What does that mean?" they asked, their voice cracking. "What does it want?" The figure's form began to dissolve, its edges fraying like fabric unraveling in the wind. "Leave," it said, its voice fading with its body. "If you can." Before Alex could respond, the house began to shift. The walls groaned, stretching and twisting in unnatural ways. The floor buckled beneath their feet, and the ceiling seemed to lower, pressing down as though the house was trying to crush them. Alex turned and ran, their heart pounding as they navigated the disjointed hallways. Doors appeared and vanished, leading to nowhere, and the tapping sound returned, faster and more frantic. Just as the walls seemed ready to close in entirely, Alex burst through a door and fell into darkness. They woke up in their bed, gasping. For air, their body drenched in sweat. The mark on their wrist was darker now, more defined, and it throbbed faintly as though alive. For hours, Alex sat in their room, trying to make sense of what had happened. The house wasn't just a dream, it was something far more sinister, and the mark on their wrist was proof that it had reached beyond the boundaries of their mind. They opened their laptop and navigated back to the forum where they'd first found the thread. There had to be answers. There had to be a way to stop this. But as they scrolled through the posts, a new comment from Silent Architect appeared at the bottom of the thread. "The house knows you now. It won't let you go." The warning from Silent Architect echoed in Alex's mind. "The house knows you now. It won't let you go." They stared at the screen, their thoughts racing. Every fiber of their being told them to stop, to shut their laptop, forget about the house, and move on. But the mark on their wrist burned like a brand, a constant reminder that forgetting wasn't an option. Over the next few days, Alex tried to bury themselves in routine, hoping the house would fade from their thoughts. They avoided the deep web, ignored their laptop, and focused on anything that might keep their mind occupied. But the house refused to be ignored. At first it was subtle, the vague outline of its jagged roofline appearing in the patterns of clouds or its mismatched windows reflected in puddles on the street. Alex dismissed these as tricks of the mind, residual images from vivid dreams, but then it became impossible to deny. One morning, Alex awoke to find an unfamiliar symbol etched into the condensation on their bathroom mirror. It was jagged, angular, and eerily similar to the mark on their wrist. They wiped it away with a trembling hand, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Later that day, while passing by a construction site, Alex froze. The skeletal framework of the building under construction bore an uncanny resemblance to the incomplete walls of the house. The workers paid no attention to Alex as they stared, the sound of hammering and machinery fading into the background. That night, the dreams returned. Alex found themselves standing before the house once more. But this time, it looked almost complete. The jagged edges had smoothed, the walls stood taller, and the windows were now filled with black glass that reflected nothing. The door, however, remained slightly ajar, creaking softly in the still air. Alex wanted to turn and run, but their feet wouldn't move. It was as though the house itself was pulling them forward. They stepped inside. The interior had changed again. The hallways were more defined, their disjointed angles creating an oppressive, labyrinthine structure. The walls pulsed faintly, like the slow rhythmic beating of a heart. The tapping sound returned, steady and deliberate, guiding Alex deeper into the house. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. "Why are you here again?" a voice asked, sharp and accusatory. Alex spun around to see the shadowy figure standing in the hallway behind them. It was clearer now, its edges less blurred, its form more distinct. Though its face was still obscured, Alex could feel its eyes on them, cold and unrelenting. "I don't know," Alex admitted, their voice trembling. I didn't want to come back. The figure tilted its head, a gesture that was almost human, but unnervingly off. The house brought you back, it said. It needs you. Why? What does it want from me? Alex asked, their frustration breaking through their fear. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it stepped closer, its movements smooth and deliberate. The house is unfinished, it said, and you're helping it build. Alex's stomach dropped. What do you mean? You've crossed the threshold, the figure continued. Every time you return, you give it shape. Your fear, your thoughts, they're its foundation. It grows stronger because of you. Alex shook their head, backing away. I didn't choose this. I don't want this. You chose the moment you entered, the figure said. Now it's too late. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, as though the house itself was reacting to their conversation. The walls seemed to close in, the faint hum Alex had heard before growing into a low, menacing rumble. The shadowy figure stepped back, fading into the darkness. You need to leave, it said, its voice distant, before it's complete. The floor beneath Alex began to crack, and the walls rippled violently, their surfaces warping and bending. The tapping became deafening, joined by a chorus of whispers that overlapped and merged into an incomprehensible cacophony. Alex turned and ran, their pulse pounding as the house twisted around them. Doors appeared and vanished, hallways stretched and shifted, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath their feet. They burst through the door and fell into the void once more, waking up in their bed with a jolt. Their chest heaved as they gasped for air, the mark on their wrist burning hotter than ever. But this time, something was different. The burning sensation wasn't confined to their wrist. It radiated up their arm, leaving a faint trail of jagged lines that stretched toward their elbow. Panicked, Alex rushed to their laptop and reopened the forum thread. New comments had appeared, each more cryptic than the last. It's building itself through you. The more you think about it, the closer it gets. Stop now, or you won't wake up next time. Alex's hands trembled as they typed a reply. How do I stop it? How do I get out? The response came almost instantly. Silent Architect had replied, You can't stop it. You're already part of it. Alex stared at the screen, their heart sinking. The house wasn't just a dream. It was becoming part of their reality. And if they didn't find a way to sever the connection, it would consume them entirely. Alex stared at the screen. Silent Architect's chilling reply burned into their mind. You can't stop it. You're already part of it. The air in their apartment felt heavier, the shadows darker, as though the house was creeping closer with every passing moment. They couldn't accept this. There had to be a way out, a way to sever the connection before the house consumed them completely. Desperation drove Alex deeper into the forum, their fingers flying across the keyboard as they scoured the thread for answers. At the very bottom of the page, a post caught their eye. It was a link to a locked thread titled For Those Who've Seen the House. Unlike the public forum, this thread required a password. A single hint accompanied the link. The mark will guide you. Alex's gaze drifted to the jagged lines now stretching up their arm. The mark had grown since their last dream, its intricate pattern unsettlingly organic, as though it were alive. They typed the first few symbols they could make out into the password field. The screen flickered, and the thread unlocked. The page that loaded was a stark contrast to the public forum. Instead of a simple text layout, the thread was chaotic, its design fractured and glitching as though it were barely holding itself together. The first post was from Silent Architect, their words more fragmented and frantic than in the previous thread. If you've made it here, the house already knows you. You've crossed the threshold, there's no turning back. But there is a way to sever the connection. It's dangerous and most don't survive. But if you don't try, the house will consume you completely. Its architect won't let you go, willingly. The post went on to describe others who had encountered the house, each of them drawn to it in the same way Alex had been, through a dream that felt too real to ignore. But the further they were pulled into the house's grasp, the more it invaded their waking reality. Silent Architect claimed that the house wasn't just feeding on their fear, it was building itself through them, shaping its incomplete structure. With their thoughts and emotions, Alex scrolled further, finding posts from other users. Each one described their own harrowing experiences with the house. I wake up and the mark has spread. My walls don't look like my walls anymore. I think the house is here now. The architect spoke to me. It said I'm part of the foundation. I don't know what that means, but I can feel the floors shifting under my feet. I tried to fight it, but every time I fall asleep, I wake up closer to the center of the house. There's no way out. One post in particular stood out. It was longer than the others, written by someone named Obsidian Seeker. They claimed to have found a way to sever the connection to the house, though they admitted they hadn't attempted it themselves. The method involved finding and destroying the house's keystone, an object hidden deep within its structure that anchored it to its victims. According to Obsidian Seeker, the keystone wasn't just an object. It was a part of the house itself, a living thing that fought back when threatened. The post ended with a warning. The house will do everything it can to stop you. It knows when you're coming for it. The architect will use your worst fears against you. If you can't face them, you won't make it out. Alex's stomach churned. The idea of confronting the house, of venturing deeper into its shifting, malevolent halls, was terrifying. But the alternative was worse. They couldn't let the house consume them. They had to try. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Alex combed through the thread, taking notes and piecing together the fragments of advice left by other users. They learned that the keystone was always hidden in the heart of the house, a place no one had been able to reach before. Silent Architect had left one cryptic clue about finding it. Follow the fractures. The house's wounds will lead you. By the time Alex closed their laptop, night had fallen. The apartment was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. They sat on the edge of their bed, staring at their reflection in the window. The mark on their arm seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, pulsing like a heartbeat. For the first time, Alex noticed something else in the reflection, a faint outline of the house, its jagged roofline and dark windows barely visible in the shadows behind them. They spun around, but the room was empty. Still, the sensation of being watched was undeniable. With a deep breath, Alex lay down and closed their eyes. This time they wouldn't wait for the house to call them. They would go willingly, seeking its heart and the keystone that bound it to them. As sleep overtook them, they whispered a quiet promise to themselves. I will end this. When Alex opened their eyes, they were standing before the house again. It was more complete than ever, its silhouette towering and imposing against the void. The windows now glowed faintly, like eyes watching their every move. The door creaked open, and the sound of tapping echoed from within, beckoning them inside. This time, Alex didn't hesitate. They stepped across the threshold, determined to face whatever lay ahead. Alex woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, their breath ragged and uneven. The house had felt more real than ever before. Its walls, its whispers, the oppressive hum that seemed to vibrate in their chest. It lingered even after they were awake. As they sat up in bed, trying to shake the residual dread, they noticed something that made their hearts skip a beat. The walls of their bedroom looked different. At first it was subtle, just a faint distortion in the paint, a texture that hadn't been there before. But as Alex's eyes adjusted to the dim light, they realized the changes were far more significant. The corners of the room didn't meet at right angles anymore. The ceiling seemed higher, and the walls appeared to pulse faintly, as if alive. Their apartment was transforming, taking on the characteristics of the house from their dreams. The mark on Alex's arm burned, the jagged lines now creeping past their elbow and toward their shoulder. They grabbed at it instinctively, the heat searing against their palm. The mark pulsed in time with the walls, as though they were connected. Panic bubbled up inside them, but Alex forced themselves to stay calm. They needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront the house. The day passed in a haze of unease. Alex tried to go about their routine, but the changes were impossible to ignore. Shadows moved unnaturally across the walls, stretching and twisting in ways that defied logic. Objects shifted positions when Alex wasn't looking. Books stacked themselves, chairs turned to face the center of the room, and the clock on the wall ticked backward. The boundary between the house and their reality was breaking down, and Alex could feel it tightening its grip. By evening, the transformation became undeniable. The air in the apartment grew heavy, thick with the same oppressive energy Alex had felt in the house. The tapping sound started again, faint at first, but growing louder and more insistent. It seemed to come from everywhere, from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath their feet. Alex covered their ears, but the sound penetrated, reverberating, in their skull. Then, for the first time, the house spoke while they were awake. "You're almost there," the voice whispered, low and guttural, echoing from the walls. "Finish what you started." Alex stumbled back, their heart hammering. "What do you want from me?" they shouted, their voice trembling. The walls responded, rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. The voice grew louder, its tone laced with malice. "You're part of the Foundation now. You can't escape. Come to me." The room began to shift around them, the walls stretching and twisting as though trying to swallow Alex whole. They bolted for the door only to find it gone, replaced by a blank wall. Panic set in as they searched for an exit, but every door, every window had vanished. The apartment was no longer theirs. It was the house, pulling them deeper into its clutches. Desperate, Alex grabbed their phone and opened the deep web forum. The thread was still there, but now it seemed distorted, the text glitching and overlapping. New messages from Silent Architect filled the page, their words fragmented but urgent. "The house is merging with your world. It won't stop until it consumes you completely. Follow the fractures, find the keystone, it's your only chance." The last message stood out. "If you don't go willingly, it will force you." As if on cue, the tapping grew deafening, accompanied by a low, guttural groan that shook the walls. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room began to coalesce, forming a familiar figure. It was the shadowy presence from Alex's dreams, but now it was here, in their waking reality. Its form was more defined, its edges sharper, and its presence suffocating. "You've waited too long," it said, its voice a blend of whispers and growls. "It's time." Alex backed away, their hands trembling. "I don't want this," they said, their voice barely audible. "I didn't ask for this." The figure tilted its head, its movements eerily smooth. "You opened the door," it said, "and now you must walk through it." The room darkened, the only light coming from the faint glow of the mark on Alex's arm. The figure stepped closer, its form towering and imposing. "You're part of the house now," it said. "You can't run from it." Before Alex could respond, the floor beneath them gave way, and they plunged into darkness. When they opened their eyes, they were standing in the house again. It was almost complete now, its walls towering and unyielding, its hallways stretching into infinity. The oppressive hum was louder, vibrating through Alex's body, and the tapping sound echoed endlessly, like a heartbeat. The house felt alive, and Alex realized with a sinking dread that they were standing inside something that had crossed the boundary between dream and reality. "You've made it," the shadowy figure said, appearing at the end of the hallway. "Now finish it." The words echoed ominously as Alex stared down the endless hallway, their pulse racing. They knew what they had to do. The keystone was here, somewhere deep within the house. If they could find it, they might be able to sever the connection and escape. But with every step they took, the house seemed to shift around them, closing in tighter as though it knew their intent. Alex clenched their fists, their resolve hardening. The house wanted to consume them, but they wouldn't let it. They would find the keystone, no matter what horrors the house threw in their path. The house seemed to breathe around Alex, its walls pulsating with an unnatural rhythm that mirrored the frantic beating of their own heart. The oppressive hum grew louder with every step they took, reverberating through their body like a low, menacing growl. The air was thick, suffocating, and Alex felt as though they were walking deeper into the belly of a living organism. The tapping sound persisted, guiding them forward through the endless twisting corridors. As they moved, the house continued to shift. Hallways elongated, narrowing until Alex could barely squeeze through, only to suddenly expand into vast, cavernous rooms that stretched far beyond what should have been possible. Doors appeared and vanished, their frames warped and jagged. The house was toying with them, forcing them deeper into its labyrinthine structure. Then, without warning, the tapping stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing against Alex's ears like a physical force. They froze, their breath shallow, their eyes darting around the dimly lit corridor. The walls had stopped shifting and the air grew colder. Alex's instincts screamed at them to turn back, but the hallway ahead seemed to beckon, its darkness, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "You've come far," a voice said, cutting through the silence like a blade. Alex spun around, their heart leaping into their throat. Standing at the far end of the corridor was a figure unlike any they had seen before. It wasn't the shadowy presence that had haunted their dreams, nor was it the vague forms they'd glimpsed in the walls. This figure was tall and imposing, its form eerily human but unnervingly perfect, as though sculpted from polished obsidian. Its eyes glowed faintly, a piercing white light that seemed to see straight through Alex. Who are you?" Alex stammered, their voice barely audible. The figure tilted its head, the motion unnervingly smooth. "I am the architect," it said, its voice resonant and commanding. "I designed this place, I gave it life." Alex's blood ran cold. "You created the house?" The architect stepped closer, its movements fluid and deliberate. "I created the idea of it," it said, "a place that exists beyond the boundaries of reality, feeding on the minds of those who dare to imagine it. I designed its foundation, but its form, its completion, is up to those who enter it." The words hung heavy in the air, and Alex felt a wave of nausea wash over them. "What do you mean? Why me?" The architect's glowing eyes narrowed. "Because you looked for it," it said simply. "You opened the door. Your curiosity gave it shape, your fear gave it strength, and now your presence completes it." Alex shook their head, backing away. "I didn't know, I didn't want this." The architect's expression didn't change, but its voice grew colder. "Ignorance does not absolve you. You crossed the threshold. You are part of the house now, whether you wish to be or not." The walls around Alex began to ripple again, the faint hum returning. The air grew heavier, and the corridor seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in closer. "I don't want to be part of this," Alex said, their voice trembling. "I just want to leave." The architect tilted its head again, its glowing eyes piercing. "Leave?" it repeated as though the word was foreign to it. "There is no leaving, not while the keystone remains intact." "The keystone," Alex whispered, remembering the fragmented posts from the Deep Web forum. "What is it? Where is it?" The architect stepped closer, its towering form casting a long, dark shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly. "The keystone is the heart of the house," it said. "It binds the structure to those who enter, feeding on their fear, their curiosity, their very essence. Without it, the house cannot exist." "Then I'll destroy it," Alex said, their voice firmer now, a flicker of defiance breaking through their fear. The architect's glowing eyes narrowed further. "Many have tried," it said. "None have succeeded. The house will not let you reach it. It will fight you with everything it has. And even if you find it, destroying it will not come without a cost." "What cost?" Alex demanded, but the architect didn't answer. Instead, it extended a long, obsidian-like hand, pointing down the corridor. The walls began to ripple violently, and the air grew colder still. "The keystone lies at the heart of the house," the architect said. "But beware. The closer you get, the more you will lose." Alex clenched their fists, their resolve hardening. "I don't care, I'll destroy it. I'm not going to let this place take me." The architect's form began to dissolve, its edges blurring like smoke. "We shall see," it said, its voice fading. "The house is alive, and it will protect itself. If you are not ready, it will consume you." The figure vanished, and the corridor plunged into darkness. The tapping sound returned, louder and more erratic, accompanied by the low guttural groan of the house itself. The walls began to shift violently, twisting and contorting as though the house was preparing for battle. Alex took a deep breath, their pulse pounding. The keystone was their only chance, and they weren't going to let the house win. Clutching the jagged edges of their fear, they stepped forward into the shifting darkness, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The air around Alex thickened as they ventured deeper into the shifting corridors of the house. Every step felt heavier, as though the house itself was trying to weigh them down. The walls no longer rippled subtly. They churned and twisted violently, their jagged edges scraping against each other with an ear-piercing screech. The low hum had turned into a deep, guttural vibration that seemed to echo in Alex's chest. The tapping sound was everywhere now, coming from all directions. It wasn't just a noise, it was alive, pulsing with intent, guiding Alex deeper into the labyrinth. Despite the suffocating dread, Alex pressed on, their gaze fixed on the endless hallway stretching before them. The house had no intention of letting them go, and every inch forward felt like a battle against its will. The mark on Alex's arm burned hotter with each step, the jagged lines now creeping across their shoulder and toward their neck. It pulsed in time with the tapping. The pain sharp and unrelenting. Alex clutched at it, gritting their teeth, but the mark refused to be ignored. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a tether binding them to the house, and Alex could feel it tightening with every passing second. The hallway shifted abruptly, the walls collapsing inward and forcing Alex to squeeze through a narrow gap. On the other side, they emerged into a cavernous room unlike anything they had seen before. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, vanishing into darkness, and the floor was uneven, made of rough stone that seemed to pulse faintly under their feet. The room was filled with doors, hundreds of them lining the walls at every angle. Each door was slightly ajar, and faint whispers emanated from within. Alex's breath hitched as they took a cautious step forward. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into an incomprehensible cacophony. Some voices were pleading, others angry, and some were barely more than faint sighs. Alex realized with a sinking dread that the voices were calling their name. "Don't. Listen," Alex muttered to themselves, forcing their gaze away from the doors. "It's just another trick." But the house wasn't letting them go so easily. The doors began to creak open wider, the whispers growing more insistent. Shadows spilled out into the room, coalescing into twisted, indistinct shapes that moved toward Alex with unsettling fluidity. They weren't the shadowy figure Alex had seen before. These were fractured and jagged, their forms shifting erratically as they advanced. Panic surged through Alex as the shadows closed in. They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing against the uneven floor. The doors slammed shut behind them one by one, the sound reverberating through the cavern like thunder. The shadows followed relentlessly, their movements growing more erratic, their shapes stretching and twisting unnaturally. The room shifted again, the walls folding inward to form a new hallway. Alex stumbled through, gasping for air, the oppressive heat of the mark on their arm driving them forward. The hallway stretched endlessly, but the tapping sound at the end was unmistakable, a steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to pull Alex closer. They didn't need to look back to know the shadows were still following. As they rounded a corner, the hallway abruptly ended in a dead end. Alex skidded to a halt, their chest heaving as they stared at the blank wall in front of them. The tapping grew louder, resonating through the walls, and the shadows surged forward, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Alex braced themselves, ready to fight, when the wall in front of them cracked. A jagged fissure spread across the surface, glowing faintly with a sickly light. The tapping sound emanated from within, louder and more insistent, and Alex realized the fracture was a door. The house was guiding them toward it, but whether it was a trap or a chance to escape, they couldn't be sure. The shadows lunged just as Alex pressed their hand against the fissure. The wall gave way, and they fell forward, into darkness. Alex landed hard on the ground, the air knocked from their lungs. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves in a new space. It was smaller than the others, its walls close and suffocating. The air here was cold and damp, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of water that rippled beneath their feet. At the center of the room stood the shadowy figure, the same one that had warned Alex in their dreams. It was clearer now, its edges defined, its form solid. "You've come far," it said, its voice low and resonant, "but you won't go any further." Alex staggered to their feet, glaring at the figure. "I'm not stopping," they said, their voice trembling but defiant. "I'll find the keystone and I'll destroy it." The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You don't understand what you're facing," it said. "The keystone isn't just an object, it's the heart of the house. Destroying it will destroy you." Alex clenched their fists, their resolve hardening. If that's what it takes, then so be it. The shadowy figure stepped closer, its form towering over Alex. "The house won't let you win," it said. "It will take everything from you before it lets you go." The room began to tremble, the water on the floor rippling violently as the walls pulsed with a dark, throbbing energy. The figure dissolved into the shadows, its voice echoing ominously. "Let's see if you're strong enough to finish what you started." The tapping sound resumed, louder than ever, guiding Alex deeper into the heart of the house. The air grew colder as Alex followed the relentless tapping deeper into the heart of the house. Each step felt heavier, their body weighed down by an oppressive force that seemed to pull them closer to the source. The walls around them rippled like water, their surfaces dark and uneven, and the faint glow of the fissures within them cast eerie shadows that danced across the floor. The house was alive and it was watching. The corridor ended abruptly at a massive, jagged door, unlike any Alex had seen before. Its surface was made of the same pulsating material as the walls, but it was laced with intricate carvings, symbols that resembled the mark on Alex's arm. The tapping sound came from beyond the door, steady and unyielding, a rhythm that seemed to sync with Alex's own heartbeat. For a moment, Alex hesitated, their hand hovering just inches from the door. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to flee, but they knew there was no escape. The house would never let them go unless they faced what lay beyond. Taking a deep breath, Alex pushed the door open. The room on the other side was vast, impossibly so, its dimensions defying logic. The ceiling stretched into darkness, and the walls seemed to fold inward, creating a warped, spiraling effect that made Alex's head spin. At the center of the room was the keystone. It wasn't what Alex expected. The keystone wasn't a solid object or a piece of architecture. It was alive. It pulsed like a heart, its surface dark and veined, with tendrils of shadow spreading outward and burrowing into the walls and floor. The tapping sound came from within it, a rhythmic thrum that filled the room and resonated in Alex's chest. It was mesmerizing and terrifying, a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical that seemed to embody the house's very essence. As Alex stepped closer, the keystone reacted. The tendrils began to writhe, pulling back from the walls and coiling. Like snakes, the tapping grew louder, faster, becoming an erratic drumbeat that echoed through the chamber. The house was protecting its heart, and Alex knew it wouldn't let them destroy it without a fight. "Is this what you wanted?" Alex shouted, their voice echoing in the vast space. "Is this what you've been pulling me toward?" The keystone didn't respond, but the walls did. The room began to shift violently, the floor buckling and cracking as shadows poured in. From every corner, they coalesced into familiar shapes, fractured, twisted versions of the shadowy figure Alex had seen before. But this time, there were dozens of them, their glowing eyes fixed on Alex with malicious intent. "You won't stop me," Alex said, their voice trembling but resolute. They reached into their pocket, pulling out a jagged shard of stone they'd found earlier in the house. It wasn't much, but it felt sharp and solid in their hand. A weapon, however small, against the nightmare before them. The shadows lunged, their movements chaotic and fluid. Alex ducked and dodged, swinging the shard wildly as they fought their way toward the keystone. The figures were relentless, their tendrils slashing through the air and forcing Alex to retreat more than once. But each time, they pressed forward, their determination outweighing their fear. The closer Alex got to the keystone, the more the house resisted. The walls groaned, collapsing inward, and the floor cracked and shifted beneath their feet. The oppressive hum became deafening, drowning out even the sound of their own thoughts. But Alex kept moving, their eyes locked on the keystone. Finally, they reached it. The keystone loomed before them, its pulsating surface radiating a sickly, dark light. The tendrils writhed violently, lashing out like whips as Alex raised the shard of stone above their head. The heat from the keystone was overwhelming, its energy searing Alex's skin and making their entire body ache. But they didn't stop. With a primal scream, Alex drove the shard into the keystone. The impact was instantaneous. The keystone let out a deafening, otherworldly scream, a sound that reverberated through the house and rattled Alex's very bones. The tendrils thrashed wildly, their movements frantic and uncontrolled, as the keystone's surface cracked and splintered. A blinding light erupted from within, consuming the room and forcing Alex to shield their eyes. The house began to collapse. The walls folded inward, the ceiling crumbled, and the floor beneath Alex's feet gave way. The oppressive hum was replaced by a deafening roar as the house screamed in pain, its very essence unraveling. Alex stumbled backward, the light from the keystone growing brighter and hotter until it engulfed everything. For a moment, there was silence. Then Alex felt themselves falling. When Alex opened their eyes, they were lying on the floor of their apartment. The air was still, and the room was quiet, eerily so. They sat up slowly, their body aching, and looked around. The walls were solid and unmoving. The shadows were still, and the mark on their arm was gone. It was as though the house had never been there, but something felt off. The apartment was too quiet, too still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Alex stood and walked to the window, peering outside. The street looked normal, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, but something about it felt wrong. It was as if the house had left a part of itself behind, a lingering presence that refused to fully disappear. Alex turned back toward the room, their gaze lingering on the faint outline of the keystone's fissures, now etched into the wall. The house was gone, but its memory remained. The eerie calm in Alex's apartment felt like the eye of a storm. The walls were no longer shifting, and the oppressive hum had vanished, but an undeniable sense of unease lingered. Something was wrong. The house wasn't gone, it was waiting. Alex could feel its presence in the air, heavy and suffocating, as though it was watching, biding its time. The faint outline of the keystone's fissures on the wall seemed to pulse, faintly, a reminder of the connection that hadn't been fully severed. Alex approached it cautiously, their fingers brushing against the cold, jagged marks. The sensation sent a shiver down their spine, and they pulled back quickly. "You're still here, aren't you?" Alex whispered into the silence, their voice trembling. The room offered no response, but the shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, shifting ever so slightly. Alex's heart raced. The house was still alive, and it wasn't finished with them. Their phone buzzed, startling them. It was a notification from the Deep Web forum. Alex hesitated before opening it, their breath hitching as they read the message. "The house isn't done. The keystone was only part of it. If you don't destroy the architect, it will rebuild itself. You have one chance to end this." The words hit Alex like a blow. They had thought destroying the keystone would be enough, but the house's true power wasn't in its heart. It was in its creator, the architect, the being that had designed the house, shaped its existence, and bound Alex to its reality. The message continued, "You know where to find it. Go now, before it's too late." Alex clenched their fists, their resolve hardening. They couldn't let the house rebuild itself. If the architect was the key to ending it, then they would confront it, no matter the cost. Taking a deep breath, Alex lay down on their bed, closing their eyes and focusing on the house. It didn't take long for sleep to claim them. When they opened their eyes, they were standing in the house once more. It was different now. The walls were cracked, the floors uneven, and the once vivid pulsations had dimmed. The keystone's destruction had weakened it, but the house wasn't dead yet. The oppressive hum was faint, but it lingered, like the last gasps of a dying creature. The tapping returned, softer this time, but still deliberate. It guided Alex down a long, narrow hallway that stretched into darkness. The walls groaned, their surfaces fractured and bleeding faint streams of light. The house was struggling to hold itself together, and Alex could feel its desperation. Every step felt heavier, as though the house was trying to drag them down, but they pressed on, their determination outweighing their fear. At the end of the hallway, Alex found a massive door. It was unlike any they had seen before, tall and imposing, made of a dark, polished material that seemed to absorb the faint light around it. Intricate carvings covered its surface, the symbols glowing faintly as though alive. The door pulsed in time with the tapping, its rhythm slow and steady. Alex placed their hand on the door, the cold surface sending a shiver through their body. It resisted at first, but as they pushed harder, it creaked open, revealing a vast, cavernous room beyond. The air inside was heavy, thick with a dark energy that made it hard to breathe. At the center of the room stood the architect. It was larger than before, its form towering and impossibly tall, its surface gleaming like obsidian. The glowing eyes that had haunted Alex in their dreams were brighter now, piercing through the darkness with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. The architect's presence was overwhelming, filling the room with a suffocating sense of dread. "You've come to finish it," the architect said, its voice resonating through the chamber. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, cold and certain. Alex stepped forward, their fists clenched. "I'm ending this," they said, their voice steady despite the fear threatening to consume them. "No more Keystone, no more house, no more you." The architect tilted its head, a gesture that was almost curious. "You think you can destroy me?" it asked. "You are part of this house. Your fear, your anger, your very essence, it's woven into its foundation. Destroying me will destroy you." Alex hesitated, the weight of the words settling over them. "Maybe," they said after a moment, their voice quieter. "But if it means no one else gets trapped here, then it's worth it." The architect's glowing eyes narrowed. "Then come," it said, spreading its arms wide. "Let's see if you have the strength." The room shifted violently, the floor cracking and splintering as tendrils of shadow erupted from the ground. They lashed out at Alex, sharp and unrelenting, forcing them to dodge and weave. The walls began to close in, their surfaces rippling like water, and the oppressive hum grew louder, pounding in Alex's ears. Alex fought with everything they had, using the jagged shard they had kept from the keystone to cut through the tendrils. Each strike sent a shockwave through the room, the architect's form flickering slightly with every blow. But the shadows kept coming, relentless and endless, and Alex could feel their strength waning. "You can't win," the architect said, its voice calm and unwavering. "The house is eternal. Even if you destroy me, it will find another way." Alex gritted their teeth, their grip on the shard tightening. "Not if I destroy it completely," they said. With a final surge of determination, they lunged towards the architect, dodging the tendrils and driving the shard into its chest. The architect let out a deafening roar, its form shattering like glass. The room exploded with light, blinding and all-consuming, as the house began to collapse around them. The walls folded inward, the floor crumbled, and the oppressive hum was replaced by an ear-piercing silence. Alex felt themselves falling, the light growing brighter until it consumed everything. When they opened their eyes, they were back in their apartment. The room was quiet, the walls solid, and the air still. The mark on their arm was gone, and the oppressive presence of the house had vanished. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alex felt free. But as they stood in the silence, a faint tapping echoed from the wall behind them. Alex froze, their breath hitching. Turning slowly, they saw nothing, just the blank, unbroken surface of the wall. Yet the tapping continued, soft and deliberate, a chilling reminder that the house might not be gone after all. The tapping behind Alex was faint but deliberate, each sound echoing in the otherwise silent apartment. Their pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out on their forehead. They turned slowly to face the wall, their breath catching, as the shadows seemed to deepen in the room's corners. The house wasn't gone. It had left a fragment of itself behind, waiting. "No," Alex whispered, shaking their head. "I destroyed the architect. I ended this." The tapping stopped abruptly, and for a moment the silence was deafening. Then the wall began to ripple, its surface bending and distorting as though something on the other side was pushing against it. Alex stumbled backward, their chest heaving as the outline of a jagged door began to form in the wall. It was the same door they had seen in the house, its surface etched with faintly glowing symbols. A low, guttural hum filled the room, growing louder with each passing second. The door pulsed faintly, the light from its carvings intensifying. Alex realized with growing dread that the house wasn't trying to pull them back. It was trying to rebuild itself here in their reality. "No!" Alex shouted, their voice trembling but defiant. "You're not coming back, I won't let you." The room began to shift, the walls rippling and stretching, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The faint hum turned into a deafening roar as the door in the wall cracked open, spilling tendrils of shadow into the apartment. They writhed and twisted, reaching for Alex with an almost sentient hunger. Alex backed away, their mind racing. The architect's words echoed in their memory. The house is eternal. Even if you destroy me, it will find another way. The keystone had been destroyed, and the architect had been defeated, but the house wasn't gone. It had left its mark, and now it was using that fragment to claw its way back into existence. I ended this, Alex muttered, their voice shaking. This isn't real. The tendrils surged toward them, their movements chaotic and relentless. Alex grabbed the shard of stone they had kept, a piece of the keystone that had somehow followed them back into the real world. Its surface pulsed faintly, its energy resonating with the shifting shadows in the room. The shard was still connected to the house, and Alex realized it was both a weapon and a tether. The house was trying to use the shard to anchor itself in their reality, but Alex could turn it against the house. Gritting their teeth, Alex gripped the shard tightly and stepped toward the door. The tendrils lashed out, grazing their arm and sending a searing pain through their body, but they pressed on. The shard vibrated violently in their hand as though resisting, but Alex forced themselves forward. You don't belong here, Alex said through gritted teeth. This is my world, not yours. With a surge of strength, they drove the shard into the glowing symbols on the door. The impact sent a shock wave through the room, and the door let out a high-pitched screech that reverberated in Alex's skull. The tendrils recoiled, writhing in agony as the door began to crack and splinter. The room shook violently, the walls bending and folding as the house fought to maintain its grip. The shard in Alex's hand burned like fire, its energy surging into the door and amplifying the cracks. The tendrils lashed out one final time, wrapping around Alex's arm and pulling them closer to the door. Alex screamed, the pain unbearable, but they refused to let go of the shard. "You're not taking me," they shouted, their voice raw and filled with defiance. With a final, desperate push, Alex twisted the shard deeper into the door. The symbols flared brightly, their light blinding, and the tendrils let out an otherworldly scream before disintegrating into ash. The door shattered, its pieces dissolving into nothingness, and the oppressive energy in the room vanished in an instant. Alex collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The shard lay beside them, its surface dull and lifeless, its connection to the house finally severed. The room was silent, the walls solid and unyielding. The house was gone, truly gone this time. As Alex sat there, catching their breath, a wave of exhaustion washed over them. The events of the past days felt like a distant nightmare, and the realization that it was finally over brought tears to their eyes. They picked up the shard and held it tightly, a reminder of what they had survived. The days that followed were quiet. The apartment was still, the mark on Alex's arm completely gone, and no signs of the house remained. They deleted their account on the deep web forum, vowing never to revisit it. But even as they tried to move on, the memory of the house lingered, a shadow at the edge of their thoughts. One night, as Alex sat in their apartment, the faintest sound reached their ears. It was soft and rhythmic, barely audible but unmistakable. A tapping. Alex froze, their breath hitching. Turning slowly, they stared at the wall where the door had once formed. It was solid, unbroken, and still. The tapping didn't come again, but Alex knew the house was waiting.